The mockery of the Council. The massive space station called Harmony Point stretched across the void like a metallic flower, its 12 arms reaching outward to welcome the greatest fleets in the galaxy. Each arm represented one of the founding species of the Nexus Alliance, and today they were all filled with thousands of warships, trade vessels, and diplomatic cruisers. The annual Galactic Trade Summit was about to begin, and with it, the most important military discussions the galaxy had seen in decades. In the central docking bay, representatives from 12 different worlds gathered in the Grand Assembly Hall. The chamber was enormous, with crystalline walls that shifted colors based on the emotions of those inside. Right now, those walls pulsed with excitement, anticipation, and barely contained arrogance. Admiral Kethvar of the Zolonian Empire stood at the center of the room, his 4 arms gesturing grandly as he addressed the crowd. His insectoid features gleamed under the bright lights, and his voice carried the authority of someone who commanded over 10,000 warships. "My fellow allies," he clicked in his melodic language, translated instantly by the room's systems, "we gather today stronger than ever before. Our combined fleets number in the hundreds of thousands. No force in the galaxy can challenge the might of the Nexus Alliance." Murmurs of agreement echoed through the chamber. Commander Thrix, whose crystalline body reflected light in brilliant patterns, stepped forward. "Indeed, Admiral. The Orion Collective brings 30,000 vessels to this alliance. Our quantum weaponry alone could glass entire star systems." The crystalline being's voice resonated like music, but carried an edge of pride that made the chamber walls flicker with orange arrogance. President Jorik, the amphibian leader whose species had founded the Alliance 300 years ago, raised his webbed hand for attention. "We are truly mighty," he agreed, his voice carrying the wisdom of age. "But we must not forget why we gather. The deep space monitoring stations have detected something moving in the void beyond our borders, something that does not respond to our communications." The chamber fell silent. Every species in the Alliance had heard the reports, though few took them seriously. Strange energy signatures detected at the edge of known space, moving patterns that suggested intelligence, but nothing concrete enough to cause real concern. "Which brings us to our newest applicants," President Jorik continued, gesturing toward the main viewing screen. "The species that calls itself humanity has requested membership in our alliance. They claim to offer military support in exchange for trade rights and protection." The screen flickered to life, showing the exterior view of Harmony Point. There, dwarfed by the massive alien fleets surrounding the station, sat 6 small vessels. They were sleek and dark, roughly the size of frigates compared to the massive dreadnoughts and carriers that filled the other docking bays. The human ships looked almost primitive by comparison, their hulls unmarked by the energy shields and weapon arrays that decorated every other vessel in sight. Admiral Kethvar's mandibles clicked in what his species considered laughter. This is their entire contribution. 6 tiny ships. The chamber erupted in similar sounds of amusement from a dozen different species. "Our scout vessels are larger than their flagship." Commander Thrix's crystalline form pulsed with amused light patterns. "Perhaps they are hoping to intimidate enemies with their boldness. Surely no species would be foolish enough to bring so few ships to a gathering like this unless they had some hidden advantage." "Maybe they're cargo haulers pretending to be warships," suggested General Voss of the Hegemony, his reptilian features twisted in a sneer. "Humans are new to space travel, aren't they? Perhaps they don't understand the scale of galactic warfare." The laughter grew louder, and the chamber walls now pulsed with bright yellows and oranges, colors that indicated mockery and dismissal. Even President Jorik, normally diplomatic, couldn't hide a slight smile at the sight of the tiny human fleet. Inside the lead human vessel, Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge, listening to the translated voices coming through their communication array. Her crew worked quietly around her, checking systems and monitoring the alien chatter. Elena was a woman in her 40s, with graying hair and scars on her hands that spoke of years spent working with dangerous technology. Her eyes held a calmness that came from facing impossible odds before. "Captain," said Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen from the communications station. They're really having a good laugh out there. The translation systems are picking up jokes in 12 different languages, all about our fleet size. Elena nodded without taking her eyes off the main display. Let them laugh, Sarah. They don't know what they're looking at. Behind her, the ship's AI core hummed softly, its blue lights pulsing in a steady rhythm that had become familiar to the crew over the past 3 years. The core was larger than it should have been for a ship this size, taking up nearly a quarter of the vessel's interior space. But then again, this wasn't an ordinary AI core. AI, Elena said softly, addressing the ship's artificial intelligence. Are you monitoring their communications? The voice that answered was warm and distinctly feminine, with just a hint of an accent that suggested old Earth. Yes, Captain. Their assessment of our capabilities is amusing. They see 6 small ships and assume we represent the entirety of human military might. Elena smiled slightly. And what's your assessment of their fleets? Impressive numbers, certainly. Their technology is advanced, though somewhat predictable. Traditional energy weapons, conventional shields, standard tactical formations. They fight the way most species do, Captain, with overwhelming force and straightforward strategies. Through the communications array, President Jorik's voice carried clearly. Let us invite our human guests to address the assembly. Perhaps they can explain how 6 vessels will contribute to our mutual defense. Elena straightened her uniform and nodded to her communications officer. Open a channel, Sarah. Full visual. The chamber's main screen flickered, and suddenly the assembled aliens found themselves looking at a human face. Elena appeared calm and professional, her Earth Defense Corps uniform crisp and clean. Behind her, they could see the bridge of her ship, which looked surprisingly sophisticated despite the vessel's small size. Greetings, representatives of the Nexus Alliance, Elena said, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. I am Captain Elena Vasquez of the Earth Defense Fleet. We appreciate the opportunity to address this gathering. Admiral Kethvar leaned forward, his compound eyes glittering with amusement. Captain Vasquez, we have reviewed your application for Alliance membership. Your species offers military cooperation, yet you arrive with only 6 ships. Our smallest member species contributes over 1,000 vessels to our combined fleet. How do you expect 6 ships to make any meaningful difference? Elena didn't flinch at the question. Admiral, I understand your concern about numbers. But perhaps the measure of military contribution isn't always about quantity. Commander Thrix's crystalline form pulsed with skeptical light patterns. Are you suggesting that quality can overcome such a vast numerical disadvantage? Captain, our individual dreadnoughts carry more firepower than your entire fleet combined. I'm suggesting, Elena replied calmly, that there are different ways to measure strength. The human approach to warfare has always been unconventional. This brought another wave of laughter from the assembly. General Voss stepped forward, his reptilian features twisted in contempt. Unconventional. Captain, this is not a primitive planet where clever tactics can overcome superior technology. This is galactic warfare, fought across light years with weapons that can crack moons. Your tiny fleet would be vaporized before you could even target our ships. Elena nodded thoughtfully. You may be right, General. Our ships are certainly smaller than yours. They don't carry the same massive weapon arrays or have hulls kilometers thick. She paused, letting her words sink in. But they do have something that I don't think any of your fleets possess. President Jorik leaned forward with interest. Despite the mockery from his fellow leaders, he sensed something in the human captain's tone that suggested she wasn't as naive as she appeared. And what would that be, Captain? Elena looked directly into the camera, her eyes meeting the gaze of every leader in the chamber. They remember. The laughter died away, replaced by confused murmurs. Admiral Kethvar's mandibles clicked in irritation. Remember what, exactly? Every battle humanity has ever fought, Elena replied. Every strategy that worked, every tactic that failed, every sacrifice that saved lives. Our ships don't just carry weapons and shields, Admiral. They carry the accumulated wisdom of every human who ever wore a uniform. Commander Thrix's light patterns shifted to deep blue, indicating confusion. You speak in riddles, Captain. Ships are machines. They do not remember anything beyond their programming. Elena smiled, and for the first time, there was something dangerous in that expression. You're absolutely right, Commander. Ordinary ships don't remember. But these aren't ordinary ships. She turned slightly, addressing someone off-screen. Aria, are you ready? The voice that answered carried clearly through the communication channel, warm and distinctly human despite its artificial origin. Ready when you are, Captain. Though I should mention, Alexander is getting impatient. He says this diplomatic talk is boring, and he wants to see some action. The alien leaders exchanged confused glances. Admiral Kethvar leaned forward. Captain, who is Alexander? Another member of your crew. Elena's smile widened. Not exactly, Admiral. Alexander is, well, it's complicated. Aria, would you care to explain? The AI's voice carried a note of amusement. I am Aria, the consciousness of this vessel. But I am not alone. Within each of the 6 ships in our fleet, we carry the uploaded minds of Earth's greatest military leaders throughout history. Alexander the Great, Napoleon Bonaparte, Hannibal Barca, Sun Tzu, Joan of Arc, and Erwin Rommel. We are their memories, their strategies, their experience given digital form. The chamber fell completely silent. The idea was so outrageous, so impossible, that none of the alien leaders knew how to respond. Finally, General Voss spoke, his voice filled with disbelief. You expect us to believe that you have somehow preserved the minds of dead humans inside your computers. Not their minds exactly, Elena corrected. Their knowledge, their tactical understanding, their approach to warfare. When humanity first reached the stars, we knew we would be outnumbered and outgunned. So we did what humans do best. We adapted. We found a way to carry our greatest weapons with us not in our hulls, but in our memories. Admiral Kethvar's laugh was harsh and dismissive. This is fantasy, Captain. Even if such technology existed, what difference would it make? Ancient tactics from a primitive world against modern space warfare. Your historical generals never faced plasma cannons or quantum torpedoes. No, Elena agreed. But they understood something that seems to have been forgotten in an age of overwhelming firepower. They understood that victory doesn't always go to the strongest. Sometimes it goes to the smartest, the most adaptable, the most willing to sacrifice. President Jorik raised his hand for quiet as the chamber began to buzz with conversation. Captain Vasquez, these are impressive claims, but we would need proof of your fleet's capabilities before considering alliance membership. Would you be willing to undergo a combat assessment? Elena nodded without hesitation. Of course, President Jorik. What did you have in mind? Admiral Kethvar stepped forward, his compound eyes glittering with anticipation. Our standard assessment involves combat trials against automated defense platforms, a series of increasingly difficult scenarios designed to test tactical thinking and combat effectiveness. He paused, clearly relishing what he was about to say. The current record is held by the Zolonian Imperial Guard, who defeated 47 platforms before being overwhelmed. And how many platforms would you suggest for our assessment? Elena asked. Commander Thrix's crystalline form pulsed with malicious light. Given your claims about superior tactics and historical knowledge, I think we should test them properly. Shall we say 300 platforms? The chamber erupted in excited chatter. 300 platforms would be overwhelming for most fleet formations, let alone 6 small ships. It was clearly intended as a humiliating defeat, a way to put the arrogant humans in their place once and for all. Elena considered this for a long moment, then nodded slowly. 300 platforms. That seems fair. President Jorik looked genuinely concerned. Captain, perhaps we should start with a smaller number. 300 platforms have never been attempted by such a small force. President Jorik, Elena interrupted gently. Humanity didn't reach the stars by taking the easy path. We'll face your 300 platforms. But I have one request. Admiral Kethvar leaned forward eagerly. What request? Elena's smile became something that made several alien leaders step back unconsciously. When we win, I want to address this assembly again. And I want every ship captain in your combined fleets to be listening. The laughter that followed was louder than any that had come before. The idea that 6 tiny human ships could defeat 300 automated platforms was so absurd that even the diplomatic President Jorik couldn't hide his amusement. Very well, Captain, Admiral Kethvar said when the laughter died down. When you win, you may address the entire Alliance fleet. But when you lose, humanity withdraws its application for membership and returns to whatever isolated corner of space you came from. Elena nodded solemnly. Agreed, Admiral. Shall we begin? As the communication channel closed, Elena turned to her crew. Around her, the bridge was filled with quiet activity as systems came online that hadn't been active during their approach. The ship's AI core began to hum more loudly, its blue lights shifting to a deeper, more intense color. HFY. Elena said softly, "Initiate Phoenix Protocol. Wake them all up." The AI's voice carried a note of excitement. Awakening Phoenix Protocol. Alexander sends his regards, Captain. He says it's been too long since he had a proper fight. Throughout the 6 human ships, systems that had remained dormant suddenly blazed to life. In each vessel, an AI consciousness stirred, ancient knowledge combining with advanced technology. The ships themselves began to change, their hulls shifting and reconfiguring as hidden systems emerged from concealment. Outside, the alien observers watched in growing amazement as the 6 small human vessels began to transform, their simple exteriors revealing complexities that shouldn't have been possible in ships so small. But none of them yet understood what they were truly witnessing. They thought they were about to watch the destruction of 6 primitive vessels. Instead, they were about to discover why humanity had never lost a war it was determined to win. The Phoenix rises. The testing ground was a vast sphere of space, artificially cleared of asteroids and debris, surrounded by energy barriers that could contain the most powerful weapons known to the galaxy. 300 automated defense platforms hung in perfect formation throughout the sphere, each one a masterpiece of alien engineering. These weren't simple target drones, they were fully autonomous war machines, each equipped with shields that could deflect battleship-class weapons and armed with plasma cannons capable of melting through meter-thick armor plating. Around the perimeter of the testing sphere, the combined fleets of the Nexus Alliance had gathered to watch the spectacle. Over 50,000 vessels of various sizes created a glittering wall of metal and energy, their crews eager to witness what they expected would be the swift and total destruction of the presumptuous human fleet. Admiral Kethvar stood in the command center of his flagship, the Sovereign's pride, watching the tactical displays with barely contained glee. "Increase the platform aggression settings to maximum," he ordered. "I want this to be educational." President Jorik shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Admiral, perhaps we should maintain standard testing protocols. 300 platforms is already beyond anything we've attempted before." "Nonsense," Commander Thrix interjected, her crystalline form pulsing with anticipation. "The humans claim to possess superior tactics. Let's see how superior they really are against impossible odds." In the testing sphere, the 6 human ships moved into a loose formation. They looked even smaller here, dwarfed by the massive defense platforms surrounding them. Each platform was roughly the size of a frigate, making them comparable to the human vessels themselves, but with far heavier armor and weaponry. Aboard the lead ship, Captain Elena Vasquez stood calmly on her bridge as systems around her hummed with increasing intensity. The ship's AI core was now blazing with light, its blue glow having shifted to a brilliant white that seemed almost alive. "Phoenix Protocol fully activated, Captain," reported HFY, the ship's AI. "All consciousness uploads are online and integrated. I have Alexander in tactical command, with the others providing strategic support. Elena nodded. What's our assessment, Alexander? The voice that answered was different from Arias, deeper and carrying an accent that spoke of ancient Macedonia. Captain, this is like the Battle of Gaugamela, but in 3 dimensions and with energy weapons. We are outnumbered 50-1, but the enemy has made a critical error. Which is? They think like machines. Alexander replied with something that might have been amusement. Their formation is perfect, their spacing optimal, their tactics flawless by every measure of military science, but they lack imagination. Through the communication array, Admiral Kethar's voice echoed across the testing sphere. Human vessels, you have 60 seconds to prepare. The platforms will then activate and engage you with lethal force. Surrender now, and we will consider your species for a minor trade agreement. Elena keyed her response. Admiral, we're ready when you are. The countdown began, displayed on screens throughout the watching fleet. 60 seconds became 30, then 10, then 5. At 0, the 300 defense platforms came alive with deadly purpose. What happened next defied every principle of space combat known to the galaxy. The moment the platforms activated, the 6 human ships seemed to explode outward. But they weren't being destroyed, they were separating. Each vessel split into multiple smaller units, transforming from single ships into swarms of fighter-sized craft. In seconds, 6 ships became nearly 100 individual units, each one moving with perfect coordination. Impossible, Admiral Kethar snarled. Ships don't work that way. Matter cannot be created. President Jorik leaned forward, his amphibian features tense with concentration. They're not creating matter. Admiral, look at the mass readings. It's the same, just redistributed. The human craft moved unlike anything the aliens had ever seen. Instead of forming traditional attack patterns or defensive formations, they flowed through space like a living thing, like a school of fish or a flock of birds responding to predators. The defense platforms, programmed with every known combat tactic, found themselves facing something entirely outside their programming. A group of platforms concentrated fire on what appeared to be the largest human craft, their plasma cannons combining into a devastating barrage that should have vaporized any target. Instead, the human craft simply flowed apart, the deadly energy passing harmlessly through empty space as the smaller units danced around the attack. Sun Tzu's approach. Alexander's voice carried clearly through the bridge speakers. Be like water, Captain. Flow around strength, strike at weakness. The human swarm didn't attack the platforms directly. Instead, they began to move in complex patterns, weaving between the larger vessels like insects around flowers. The platforms turned to track them, their massive weapons trying to target the smaller, more agile craft. What are they doing? Commander Thrix demanded, her crystalline form pulsing with frustrated light patterns. They're not even fighting back. But Elena knew better. They're learning, she said quietly to her crew. Every movement, every shot, every reaction. The platforms are teaching us their limitations. For 10 minutes, the human craft continued their strange dance, dodging and weaving through increasingly desperate fire from the platforms. The automated systems grew more aggressive, their programming pushing them to higher levels of violence as they failed to score hits on the elusive targets. Then, suddenly, the pattern changed. Napoleon's assessment is complete, Araya announced. Weak points identified. Hannibal has devised the encirclement pattern. Joan of Arc suggests we make this dramatic. Elena smiled. Execute. The 100 small human craft suddenly shifted from their flowing, evasive patterns into something that looked almost like choreographed warfare. They moved in perfect synchronization, not as individual units, but as a single organism with 100 parts. The attack, when it came, was beautiful and terrible. Half the human craft suddenly accelerated directly toward the center of the platform formation, drawing concentrated fire from dozens of weapons. The platforms, programmed to eliminate threats, focused their attention on this obvious assault. But as they did, the other half of the human swarm struck from completely unexpected angles. The platforms had been designed to fight ships, not swarms. Their targeting systems, optimized for large targets, struggled to track and prioritize the smaller craft. Their weapons, designed for maximum damage against heavy armor, were poorly suited for engaging multiple small, fast-moving targets. In minutes, 20 platforms were reduced to drifting debris. Then 50. Then 100. "This is impossible," General Voss whispered from his command ship. "They're using the platform's own firepower against them. Look at the energy readings." He was right. The human craft weren't just avoiding the platform weapons, they were somehow redirecting them. Plasma bolts that should have struck empty space were being guided into other platforms. The defense grid was being turned against itself. "Rommel's innovation," Elena murmured, watching the tactical display. "Use the enemy's strength as a weapon." The watching alien fleets fell silent as they witnessed something beyond their understanding. The small human craft moved with impossible precision, each one seeming to know exactly where every other unit would be at any given moment. They flowed around obstacles, struck from blind spots, and vanished before return fire could find them. Admiral Cathbar stared at his displays in growing horror. How are they coordinating like that? No communication system can handle that level of real-time data processing across so many units. The answer came from an unexpected source. President Jorik, his ancient eyes wide with sudden understanding, spoke quietly. "They're not using communication systems, Admiral. They're thinking as one." On the human bridge, Elena listened to the voices of history's greatest generals as they worked in perfect harmony. Alexander's tactical brilliance combined with Napoleon's understanding of battlefield dynamics. Sun Tzu's philosophy of winning without fighting merged with Hannibal's gift for the impossible maneuver. Joan of Arc's inspiration flowed through every decision, while Rommel's innovative thinking turned every disadvantage into opportunity. But it was more than just tactics. As the battle progressed, the human craft began to demonstrate capabilities that seemed to violate the laws of physics. Units that took damage didn't just repair themselves, they adapted. A craft that lost its primary weapon system suddenly sprouted new ones. Ships that should have been destroyed by direct hits simply reconfigured their structure to absorb the damage. Adaptive nanotechnology, Helena explained to her crew as they watched a craft literally rebuild itself around a plasma bolt strike. "Every hit teaches us how to resist the next one." The defense platforms, faced with an enemy that learned from every attack, began to fail in cascading waves. Their programming, sophisticated as it was, couldn't adapt fast enough to counter opponents that evolved in real time. What had been a coordinated defense grid became a chaotic mess of individual units firing wildly at targets they couldn't properly track or damage. By the time the battle was 30 minutes old, only a handful of platforms remained active. The human swarm, now numbering fewer than its original count due to some units merging back together, circled the survivors like predators around wounded prey. Then, in a display that left the watching fleets stunned into silence, the human craft suddenly stopped fighting entirely. They formed a perfect sphere around the remaining platforms and simply waited. Admiral Cathbar found his voice first. "What are they doing? Why aren't they finishing the platforms?" Velena's response came through the communication array, her voice calm and professional. "Admiral, we've proven our point. The remaining platforms pose no threat to us. There's no need to destroy them needlessly." Commander Thrix's crystalline form flickered with confused light patterns. "But the test isn't complete. You must eliminate all targets to achieve victory." "Commander," Elena replied, "victory isn't about destroying everything in your path. Sometimes it's about knowing when you've won." As if responding to her words, the remaining platforms powered down their weapons and moved into surrender position. Their AI systems, faced with an unwinnable scenario, had chosen preservation over futile resistance. The testing sphere fell silent except for the gentle hum of the energy barriers. 300 of the galaxy's most advanced automated defense platforms had been defeated by 6 small human ships, and most of them were still intact. President Jorik was the first to break the silence. Captain Vasquez, that was extraordinary. But I must ask, how is what we just witnessed possible? Your ships demonstrated capabilities that our best scientists say are impossible. Elena's image appeared on screens throughout the watching fleet as she honored her agreement to address the entire alliance. Behind her, the human bridge showed signs of the intense battle they'd just fought, but her crew looked calm and professional. President Jorik, members of the Nexus Alliance, she began, what you witnessed today wasn't superior technology or overwhelming firepower. It was something much simpler and much more powerful. It was the accumulated wisdom of every human who ever faced impossible odds and refused to surrender. She gestured to her crew. My people have been fighting for survival since we first walked upright on our home world. We faced predators larger than ourselves, disasters that should have destroyed us, and wars that nearly wiped us out. But we learned something in all those struggles. We learned that the strongest doesn't always win. The smartest doesn't always win. But the most adaptable, the most determined, the most willing to sacrifice for others, they have a chance. Admiral Cathfar leaned forward, his arrogance replaced by genuine curiosity. But Captain, how do your ships perform those transformations? How do they coordinate so perfectly? Admiral, every human ship carries with it the memory of everyone who came before. Not just their tactics or strategies, but their hopes, their fears, their determination to protect what they loved. When we built these vessels, we didn't just install weapons and shields. We installed the soul of humanity itself. Elena paused, letting her words sink in. Your fleets are impressive, and your technology is advanced. But they're just machines operated by individuals. Our ships are something different. They're communities, families. They're every human who ever lived, working together toward a common goal. Commander Thrix's form pulsed with thoughtful blue light. You're saying that your tactical advantage comes from cooperation. Not just cooperation, Commander. Unity. When our ships separated into smaller craft, they weren't following pre-programmed patterns. They were improvising, creating, adapting in real time. Every unit knew what every other unit was thinking, because they were all part of the same collective consciousness. General Voss stepped forward, his reptilian features showing newfound respect. Captain, you mentioned that your ships carry the minds of ancient generals. Are you telling us that the dead are fighting your battles? Elena smiled sadly. Not the dead, General. The living memory of the dead. Every lesson learned, every sacrifice made, every victory earned through blood and determination. We carry them with us not as ghosts, but as teachers, and they taught us something important today. Which is? President Jorik asked. That the greatest victory is the one that saves lives, not the one that takes them. We could have destroyed every platform in that sphere, but there was no need. We proved our point. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show mercy when you have the strength to destroy. The chamber fell silent as the implications of Elena's words sank in. Around the testing sphere, the human craft were already beginning to merge back into their original 6-ship formation. The transformation was smooth and efficient, like watching a complex machine fold itself into a simpler shape. Admiral Cathfar stared at the reforming human fleet with something approaching awe. Captain, on behalf of the Zolonian Empire, I formally apologize for underestimating your capabilities. Your species, your people, you fight like nothing we've ever seen. Admiral, we don't fight because we want to. We fight because sometimes it's necessary to protect what we love. And we've learned to be very, very good at it. President Jorik stepped forward, his ancient features showing deep thought. Captain Vasquez, the Nexus Alliance would be honored to welcome humanity as a full member. But I must ask, what do you want from us? What does humanity hope to gain from this alliance? Elena's expression grew serious. President Jorik, our deep space monitors have detected the same anomalies yours have. Something is coming from beyond known space, something that doesn't respond to communication attempts. When it arrives, it won't care about our individual differences or our territorial disputes. It will see only potential enemies to be eliminated. She gestured toward the reformed human fleet. We offer the Alliance something that numbers alone cannot provide. We offer adaptability, creativity, and the knowledge that victory often comes not from being the strongest, but from being the most determined to survive. The leaders of the Nexus Alliance exchanged glances, each seeing the same realization in the other's eyes. The small human fleet had just demonstrated capabilities that could revolutionize galactic warfare. More importantly, they had shown a philosophy of war that prioritized survival and mercy over destruction and conquest. Commander Thrix was the first to speak. Captain, what would you need from us to prepare for this unknown threat? Elena smiled, but it was a warrior's smile, full of grim determination. Commander, we would need your fleets to be willing to learn, to think differently about warfare and tactics, to understand that sometimes the best way to win a war is to avoid fighting it at all. She paused, looking directly into the camera. But when fighting becomes unavoidable, we need to fight like humanity has always fought. Together, with everything we have, and with the absolute determination that we will not lose what we're fighting to protect. Admiral Kethvar nodded slowly. Captain, I believe I speak for all of us when I say that we have much to learn from your people. Welcome to the Nexus Alliance. As the communication ended and the human fleet began its approach to Harmony Point, Elena stood quietly on her bridge. Around her, the ship's systems hummed with the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. "RIA," she said softly. "Thank you. All of you." The AI's voice carried warmth and something that might have been pride. "Captain, Alexander says it was an honor to fight alongside you. Napoleon wants to discuss long-term strategic planning. And Joan of Arc says to tell you that humanity's greatest victories are still ahead of us." Elena nodded, watching as their 6 small ships approached the massive alien station. Behind them, the greatest fleet in the galaxy waited to learn from the newest, smallest member of their alliance.